King Charles III made a decision so striking, so deeply personal, that even those closest to the crown were left speechless. He reached into the very heart of his marriage, took a crown long associated with Queen Camilla.
A date that wasn't meant to surface publicly, late autumn, a private corridor inside Buckingham Palace, and a decision that even senior aides were not prepared to witness, has quietly rewritten the balance of power at the very top. Names were whispered in fragments, documents moved between offices without record, and by the time the palace lamps dimmed that evening, a shift had already begun that would leave one woman isolated and another unexpectedly elevated. What followed in the days after has been described by those closest to the situation as controlled, deliberate, and deeply personal. The moment didn't arrive with ceremony. According to a long-serving palace aide, Oliver Grant, the tension had been building for weeks, particularly around how Queen Camilla's influence had been perceived within internal circles. There were murmurs, never public, always contained, that her involvement in key decisions had begun to create unease among senior figures who felt the monarchy needed a quieter, more stabilizing presence. That unease, sources claim, reached King Charles in a way that could no longer be ignored. Camilla, once seen as the steady counterpart beside Charles, had reportedly made a final request, one that insiders now say was both strategic and emotional. A palace staff member, Margaret Ellison, described it as a firm insistence on retaining symbolic authority that went beyond tradition. But that request, despite her long-standing position, did not align with what Charles had begun to envision for the monarchy's future. There was no argument in public, no confrontation witnessed by cameras. But behind the walls, a subtle refusal carried more weight than any spoken conflict. And in that refusal, everything changed. The quiet shift around King Charles. Those closest to King Charles have begun to describe a man increasingly focused on legacy rather than loyalty. A royal guard, Daniel Reeves, who has served during both private and ceremonial functions, noted that Charles had become far more selective about who he listens to and what he allows to shape his decisions. This shift, while gradual, set the stage for what insiders now refer to as the crown moment. It wasn't about removing Camilla outright, it was about redefining her place. The symbolic nature of the crown, as explained by palace historian Edward Langford, has always extended beyond appearance. It represents influence, proximity, and most importantly, trust. By redirecting that symbolism toward Catherine, Charles wasn't just making a personal choice, he was signaling a structural change. Catherine, who had maintained a composed and careful presence over the years, was never openly positioned as a challenger. Yet, according to palace nanny-turned-confidant Helen Morris, there had been increasing acknowledgement behind closed doors that she represented a modern continuity that aligned more closely with Charles's long-term vision. Camilla's reaction, while never officially documented, has been described as controlled but deeply affected. She did not contest publicly. She did not issue statements. But the silence itself, according to multiple insiders, carried its own message, one of disappointment, perhaps even quiet resistance. Camilla's final demand and its rejection. What exactly did Camilla ask for? That question has circulated quietly among those who track palace dynamics closely. A former communications advisor, Richard Hale, suggested that her final demand involved maintaining a level of ceremonial recognition that would ensure her role remained visibly central, even as transitions occurred around her. But that request came at a time when Charles was reportedly being advised to simplify the monarchy's image. A palace insider, known only as Sarah Whitmore, revealed that there was growing concern that overlapping roles and unclear hierarchies were creating confusion, both internally and publicly. Camilla's insistence, while understandable from her perspective, did not fit into that evolving framework. And so the rejection, delivered not with confrontation but with finality, became the defining moment of this unfolding shift. What makes this more complex is the emotional layer beneath it. Camilla had spent years navigating public scrutiny, rebuilding her image, and securing her place beside Charles. To have that position quietly redefined without the chance to negotiate its terms introduced a tension that insiders say has yet to fully settle. There are even whispers from a palace staff member, Jonathan Pierce, that certain personal exchanges between Charles and Camilla in the days following were brief, formal, and notably distant. Whether that distance is temporary or indicative of something deeper remains unclear, but has not gone unnoticed. Catherine's rise and the emerging royal rift. Catherine's involvement in this shift has been, by all accounts, measured and restrained. She has not stepped forward with declarations or visible assertions of authority. Instead, her presence has been described as quietly expanding, taking on responsibilities that, until recently, were associated with Camilla. A senior aide, Laura Bennett, explained that Catherine's approach has been consistent with her long-standing strategy: observe, adapt, and never appear to force change. This has allowed her to step into a more central role without triggering overt backlash, at least publicly. However, beneath that calm exterior, there are signs of a developing rift. Not necessarily between Catherine and Camilla directly, but within the broader network of loyalties that surround them. Some palace staff remain firmly aligned with Camilla, viewing her as unfairly sidelined. Others see Catherine's rise as both necessary and inevitable. Prince William's position adds another layer of complexity. While he has maintained outward neutrality, insiders suggest that his support for Catherine's expanded role has been quietly influential. A royal household member, Thomas Green, noted that William's approval carries weight even when it isn't expressed publicly. And then there is the question of perception. How this shift is interpreted beyond palace walls could shape its long-term impact. If seen as a natural evolution, it may strengthen the monarchy's image. But if viewed as a forced transition, one that sidelines a sitting queen, it risks deepening existing tensions. For now, the palace remains outwardly composed. No official statements acknowledge the shift in the terms that insiders describe. But within those walls, where decisions are made without announcement, the balance has undeniably changed. And Camilla, once at the center of that balance, now finds herself navigating a position that is no longer as secure as it once seemed. What unfolded next did not erupt into open conflict, but it spread through the palace like a controlled fracture, quiet, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Within days of that private refusal, subtle changes began appearing in schedules, seating arrangements, and internal briefings. It was not announced, yet everyone inside the royal household understood that a line had been crossed. The shift was no longer contained to whispers. It was becoming visible in patterns, in absence, in who stood where, and more importantly, who no longer did. A senior palace coordinator, James Holloway, revealed that several long-established protocols tied to Camilla were paused for review, a phrase that, according to insiders, rarely signals anything temporary. Invitations that once bore her oversight were redirected. Meetings she would typically attend were quietly reassigned. None of this was explained publicly, but internally, it was interpreted as a systematic narrowing of her reach. At the same time, Catherine's presence expanded with a precision that felt anything but accidental. A former royal aide, Eleanor Whitby, noted that the transition was structured in a way that avoided confrontation but ensured permanence. Catherine wasn't replacing Camilla in a visible sense. She was being placed where influence naturally accumulates, where decisions are shaped before they are ever announced. Camilla's isolation behind palace walls. Those who had long worked closely with Camilla began to notice a distinct change in her environment. According to a palace staff member, Robert Finch, her private office saw a reduction in foot traffic, with key advisors reassigned or absorbed into broader teams aligned with the king's evolving strategy. It wasn't a dismissal. It was something more controlled, more deliberate. A palace nanny, discreetly identified as Caroline Hughes, shared that Camilla had become noticeably withdrawn during informal gatherings, often choosing to leave earlier than expected or avoid spaces where discussions around future planning were taking place. This wasn't the behavior of someone removed entirely, but of someone aware that her influence was being quietly edged out. What deepened the situation further was the response, or lack of it, from those who once stood firmly in her corner. A royal guard, Michael Turner, observed that several individuals who had previously shown open loyalty began adopting a more neutral stance. There was a sense that aligning too closely could carry consequences, he explained, hinting at an internal recalibration of allegiances. Camilla's final attempts to assert her position, according to insider Daniel Whitaker, were met with polite acknowledgement but little action. Her suggestions were heard, documented, and then, as one source put it, filed without urgency. It was a subtle but unmistakable signal that her authority was no longer decisive. Catherine's controlled assent and William's silent role. While Camilla's circle tightened, Catherine's sphere expanded with calculated restraint. She did not overstep, did not claim visibility where it wasn't offered, but the opportunities presented to her began to multiply. A communications officer, Lydia Barnes, described it as a careful elevation that ensured acceptance rather than resistance. Her involvement in key charitable strategies, diplomatic appearances, and internal planning sessions increased, often in areas that had previously been shared responsibilities. This was not framed as a replacement, but the overlap became impossible to ignore. Catherine's approach remained consistent, measured, composed, and aligned with the image the monarchy sought to project. Behind this, Prince William's influence was quietly present. Though he maintained a distance from overt involvement, a household insider, Gregory Mills, suggested that his alignment with the king's direction had reinforced the stability of the transition. William did not need to speak publicly. His positioning alone carried weight within palace dynamics. There were even indications shared by a former staff liaison, Angela Rowe, that William had encouraged a streamlined representation of the monarchy, one that reduced overlapping roles and emphasized clarity. This perspective, aligning closely with Charles's evolving vision, further solidified Catherine's place within the shifting structure. Yet, this ascent did not come without tension. Some within the palace viewed the pace and precision of these changes as unsettling. A junior aide, Thomas Elridge, remarked that it felt like watching a reorganization that had been planned long before anyone realized it had begun. The growing rift and what lies beneath. What has emerged in the aftermath is not a dramatic fallout, but a quiet and persistent divide. It runs through conversations, through decisions, and through the unspoken understanding of who holds influence and who no longer does. Camilla's position, while still formally intact, has been altered in ways that insiders say cannot easily be reversed. A senior palace advisor, Henry Collins, described the situation as a rebalancing that carries emotional consequences. The monarchy may appear unified from the outside, but internally there are fractures, subtle, controlled, yet deeply felt. There are also whispers of broader implications. A former royal correspondent, Philip Dawkins, suggested that this shift could influence how future roles are defined, particularly in how authority is distributed among senior members. If one position can be quietly redefined, it raises questions about the permanence of others. Even beyond the immediate circle, the effects are being felt. Staff members are adjusting, alliances are being reconsidered, and the atmosphere within the palace has taken on a more cautious tone. Decisions are weighed not just for their impact, but for how they align with an evolving structure that seems to prioritize clarity over tradition. As for Camilla, those closest to her describe a figure who remains composed but increasingly distant from the center of power she once occupied. She has not challenged the shift openly, but her silence, much like before, carries weight. And Catherine, now positioned closer than ever to the core of the monarchy's future, continues her ascent without disruption, an approach that ensures the transition remains as smooth as it is undeniable. What remains uncertain is whether this quiet transformation will settle into stability or whether the underlying tensions will eventually surface. For now, the palace holds its composure. But beneath that surface, the balance has shifted, and those who witnessed it know that it did not happen by chance.